Lyra of the Solari Empire stood at the viewport of the Terran exploration ship Dauntless, her silver eyes reflecting the faint blue glow of distant stars. She had expected humans to live in chaos, their ships messy and crude, their manners primitive. In truth, it was worse than she imagined. The corridor smelled faintly of oil and metal, the air heavy with human scent. Their laughter echoed through the halls even when the ship trembled from hyperlight turbulence. They were loud, clumsy, emotional. Everything about them felt undisciplined to her. To the Kalari, emotion was weakness. Her kind had long since learned to temper their instincts. They spoke in calm tones, moved with precision, and valued logic above all else. But humans felt too much. They cried, laughed, argued, and risked their lives for reasons Lyra couldn't understand. She had studied their culture before being assigned as a celery observer to the Dauntless, but nothing in the reports had prepared her for this chaos. Her mission was simple: observe human behavior during exploration, assess their worth as potential allies, and send her findings to the Solari High Council. The Council already believed humans were an unstable species, driven by emotion, weakened by empathy, trapped in short lifespans. Lyra had no reason to doubt them. She was here to confirm what everyone already knew. Captain Ellis, a middle-aged human woman with short brown hair and eyes that carried both warmth and exhaustion, was the opposite of everything Lyra respected. The woman smiled too easily, joked with her crew, and even called Lyra kid, despite the fact that Lyra was nearly twice her age in Solari years. Ellis was respected by her crew, even loved. To Lyra, it made no sense. Respect, she thought, should come from fear or authority, not affection. At the morning briefing, Ellis leaned on the table with a relaxed grin. "All right, team. Today we finish mapping Sector Theta 7. The scanners picked up some strange mineral readings. Let's not get too cozy until we know what we're looking at." Her tone was light, but her crew listened closely. They nodded. A few chuckled, but everyone followed her orders without question. Lyra sat silently at the edge of the room, recording notes on her holographic pad. She noticed how easily they joked with their superior, how laughter often filled their meetings. It was baffling. Among the Solari, command was silent and absolute. There was no laughter in duty. To her, humans lacked discipline. They worked hard, yes, but their methods seemed sloppy. When they made mistakes, they forgave each other too quickly. When danger came, they panicked before acting. Cowards, she whispered to herself as she wrote. Later that day, she visited the ship's cafeteria. Humans crowded around tables, sharing food, stories, and laughter. One of the engineers, a tall man named Ramos, noticed her standing alone. "Hey, Observer Lyra, you ever tried coffee?" he asked with a friendly grin. He poured her a cup before she could refuse. "It's the best thing about being human," he added, sliding the steaming cup toward her. She stared at the dark liquid. "It smells strange." "That's the smell of life, my friend," Ramos said, raising his own cup. "Keeps the heart beating and the brain awake." Lyra took a cautious sip. The taste was bitter, sharp, and oddly warm. "You drink this by choice?" He laughed. "Every day. Sometimes it's the only thing keeping me from losing my mind out here." The humans around them laughed, and Lyra forced a polite nod. She didn't understand why they found that funny. Everything they did seemed laced with humor, even their pain. She had read that laughter helped humans cope with stress, but seeing it in person made it feel childish. They laughed because they were afraid to face fear, she told herself. Over the next few days, Lyra watched them work. Humans had no mental link like the Solari. They couldn't share thoughts or emotions telepathically, yet they managed to coordinate with gestures, shouts, and instinct. They argued constantly, disagreed on minor details, and yet somehow reached solutions faster than she expected. Their cooperation was chaotic but effective. It irritated her that it worked at all. She spent her nights sending reports back to the Solari vessel stationed near the border. Her entries were cold and factual. Humans rely heavily on emotional bonding to maintain discipline. Their communication methods are inefficient, but compensated by adaptability. They are physically fragile and often irrational under pressure. She ended every report the same way. Conclusion pending, but early assessment aligns with Council's view. Humans are emotionally unstable and lack true courage. One evening, she found Captain Ellis standing alone at the observation deck. The stars outside glimmered like ice shards scattered across the black. Ellis looked tired. her hands tucked behind her back. You ever get used to it? Lyra asked, stepping beside her. Used to what? Ellis replied with a faint smile. The emptiness. The silence of space. Ellis took a deep breath before answering. No one really gets used to it. We just learn to live with it. Lyra tilted her head. Your species seems unafraid. You explore despite the dangers, yet you admit fear. Ellis chuckled softly. Fear's part of the job. It keeps us sharp. You don't stop being afraid, you just stop letting it control you. Lyra frowned. That sounds illogical. If fear's dangerous, why allow it? Because it reminds us what matters, Ellis said, her voice calm. Without fear, we'd forget what's worth protecting. Lyra didn't respond. She didn't understand. The Solari had abandoned fear centuries ago, believing it a primitive instinct. To hear a human speak of fear as a guide rather than a weakness unsettled her. Later, in her quarters, she reviewed the day's logs. The human crew had worked for 16 hours repairing a malfunctioning navigation array. They were exhausted, covered in grease, and still laughing about a minor electrical shock one of them received. Lyra couldn't decide whether to call it resilience or foolishness. They risked so much for so little, a faulty sensor, a meaningless task, and yet they seemed proud of their effort. Days passed. The Dauntless moved deeper into the uncharted sector. Lyra's irritation grew. The crew's constant laughter grated on her nerves. Their emotional openness made her uncomfortable. They celebrated birthdays, told stories of home, and sang together during long shifts. To her, it was unnecessary sentimentality. To them, it was life. Then one morning, the ship's alarm blared through the corridors. Lyra hurried to the command deck. The navigation officer's face was pale. Captain, we're getting a distress signal from the Orphean colony. Ellis's expression hardened. Put it on screen. A flickering hologram appeared. A terrified miner spoke through static. This is Orphean colony. Reactor breach imminent. We've got civilians trapped underground. We need... The signal cut off. Lyra's stomach tightened. She had studied the Solari protocols for such scenarios. The logical response was simple. Avoid involvement. A collapsing reactor meant certain death. No species would risk a ship for strangers. She waited for Ellis to give the same order, but Ellis didn't. Plot a course, the captain said. Full burn. We're going to help them. Lyra blinked in disbelief. You can't be serious. That colony is doomed. Maybe, Ellis said. But if there's a chance, we take it. Lyra stepped forward, her tone sharp. That's irrational. You'll kill everyone on this ship for the sake of a few dying colonists. Ellis met her gaze calmly. You're free to stay behind in the escape pod if you want. Lyra froze. She couldn't tell if the human was mocking her or simply serious. You're risking hundreds of lives for strangers. Ellis's eyes softened. They're not strangers. They're people. Lyra turned away, unable to understand. Her mind raced with disbelief. Was this courage or madness? She didn't know. All she knew was that the Dauntless was now racing toward certain danger, and no one aboard seemed afraid. As the ship entered the Orphean system, the view outside changed. The colony was a broken scar on a gray asteroid, chunks of debris orbiting like ghosts. Radiation warnings filled the air. The crew moved quickly, launching drones and shuttles. Every human seemed to know their task. No one hesitated. Lyra stood at the viewport again, watching as the shuttles launched one by one toward the dying colony. The captain's voice echoed through the intercom, calm and steady. We save who we can. No one left behind. Lyra's chest felt heavy. She wanted to call them fools, to tell them logic forbade this. But something inside her stopped her. The humans were terrified. She could see it in their eyes, but they went anyway. For the first time, Lyra didn't write her report that night. She couldn't. Her beliefs, her certainty, all felt fragile now. The humans weren't what she thought they were. They were still afraid, but they acted despite it. And though she didn't understand it yet, she felt a quiet, uneasy respect forming deep inside her heart. The Dauntless entered the Orphean colony's orbit, and the moment the ship dropped out of warp, the damage was clear. The asteroid colony was tearing itself apart. Shards of metal floated in space like slow-moving knives. The surface glowed orange from underground fires, and the radiation sensors screamed warnings across every console. Lyra could feel the vibration of the engines through the deck plates as the crew worked fast, shouting orders, rerouting power, and launching rescue shuttles. Captain Ellis stood in the center of the bridge. voice calm even as chaos surrounded her. Helm, keep us in high orbit. Engineering, get the radiation shields to maximum output. I want every shuttle ready for launch in 5 minutes. Her tone carried no fear, only command. Lyra's hands trembled slightly. Her instincts told her to flee. Every Kalari instinct screamed that this mission was hopeless. The Solari valued survival above all. To risk one life for another was foolish. To risk 100 for thousands doomed already was madness. Yet watching the humans move, she saw no hesitation. They were terrified, yes, but they worked through it like it was a part of breathing. Observer Lyra, Ellis called out suddenly, breaking her thoughts. You'll ride with the second shuttle team. You're trained in structural scanning, right? Lyra blinked. I am, but no time for buts. We need every mind we can get. Lyra wanted to refuse. She wasn't part of the crew. She was only here to observe. But Ellis was already moving toward the launch bay, and somehow Lyra found herself following. The launch bay was a storm of noise. Suit seals clicking, engines humming, people shouting coordinates. The air smelled of ozone and fuel. She pulled on a radiation-resistant suit and stepped into the shuttle with 5 humans. Ramos, the engineer she'd met earlier, a medic named Tessa, and 3 rescue specialists with heavy tools strapped to their backs. Ramos grinned behind his faceplate. First time in a rescue op, huh? Lyra gave him a cold look. I was not designed for reckless missions, he chuckled. None of us were, but someone's got to do it. The shuttle trembled as it launched from the Dauntless, diving toward the shattered colony. Through the viewport, Lyra saw streaks of molten metal and explosions ripple across the asteroid's surface. The pilot cursed as debris hit the hull, but they kept going. When they landed, the ground was shaking from distant detonations. The colony was chaos. Buildings half collapsed, alarms echoing through tunnels, smoke rising through cracks in the ceiling. Humans, miners, engineers, families ran in all directions, their faces pale with fear. The rescue team split into groups, directing survivors toward shuttles. Lyra followed Ramos toward a damaged reactor vent. The heat was intense even through their suits. We've got trapped workers down here, Ramos said, checking his scanner. We cut through that wall. We can reach them. That wall is unstable, Lyra said sharply. You'll bring the entire section down, Ramos nodded. Maybe, but if we don't, they die in 10 minutes anyway. Lyra couldn't argue with logic like that, even if it wasn't the kind she understood. Ramos and his team began cutting through the metal wall, sparks flying. Lyra watched the readings on her scanner fluctuate wildly. The radiation was climbing fast. One of the rescuers, a young woman with trembling hands, hesitated. Ramos, it's too hot. We're not going to make it. Ramos didn't look up. Then let's make it count. The words hit Lyra harder than she expected. These humans knew the risk. They were afraid. She could see it in their movements, hear it in their shaky voices, but they kept going anyway. Fear wasn't stopping them. It was driving them forward. The wall finally gave way with a crash. Inside, 3 miners were trapped beneath debris. Ramos and Lyra helped pull them free, their suits glowing with radiation warnings. The air was thick with smoke and dust. One of the miners, a woman with a broken arm, looked up at Lyra with wide eyes. Are we saved? She whispered. Lyra hesitated. She wasn't used to that kind of question. Her people didn't talk about salvation. They talked about efficiency, about probability. We will try, she said simply. It wasn't much, but the woman smiled weakly as if those words alone were enough. They guided the survivors back to the surface, where shuttles waited. Explosions shook the colony as reactor failures spread through the lower levels. The air shimmered with heat, and Lyra felt her heart race. Every instinct told her to run, but the humans around her didn't flinch. They were covered in sweat and soot, their faces pale, but they worked like machines with hearts. Back in orbit, the Dauntless coordinated dozens of rescue shuttles. The communication channels were filled with voices, orders, updates, screams, and prayers. Ellis moved from station to station, her calm presence anchoring the crew. Keep the shuttles cycling. We still have hundreds unaccounted for. An officer turned to her, panic in his voice. Captain, the reactor core is going critical. We have maybe 20 minutes before detonation. Ellis nodded slowly. Then we have 19 minutes to save as many as we can. Lyra couldn't believe it. Logic demanded retreat. Every second they stayed increased the chance of total destruction. She walked up to Ellis. You're condemning this ship. The explosion will reach orbit. Ellis didn't look at her. Then we'll burn doing what we came for. Lyra stared at her, speechless. You would die for them? Ellis finally turned her head. If that's what it takes. We all would. Lyra felt something twist inside her chest, confusion, disbelief, and something else she couldn't name. Her people would never do this. They would cut losses, retreat, and mourn later with logic and grace. But these humans were different. They didn't run from despair. They fought it. Down on the surface, one of the shuttles sent a distress call. Shuttle 3 here, engines down, hull breached. We've got survivors on board, but we're stuck. Coordinates, Ellis said instantly. Lyra's heart sank as she saw the position on the map. The shuttle was less than a kilometer from the collapsing core. No ship could survive that long. Ellis turned to her helmsman. Bring us closer. I want tractor beams on that shuttle. Captain, if we go that low, that's an order. The crew obeyed. The Dauntless descended, its shields flaring as waves of radiation struck. The metal hull groaned under the strain. Sparks flew across the bridge. Lyra grabbed the edge of a console, feeling the ship shudder like a living thing. The air smelled of burning wires. The tractor beam locked onto the damaged shuttle. We've got them, shouted the operator. Ellis's voice cut through the noise. Pull them in and get ready to jump to safe orbit. As the shuttle was dragged toward the hangar, another explosion rocked the colony. The core was reaching its limit. A wave of energy erupted from the surface, slamming into the Dauntless. The lights flickered. Lyra felt herself thrown to the floor. Damage report, Ellis shouted. Shields down to 30%. Reactor containment holding, but not for long. Lyra pulled herself up, staring at the humans still working. No one was crying. No one begged for escape. They just kept fighting, their fear burning like fuel. It was madness, and somehow it was beautiful. The rescued shuttle finally cleared the hangar. We've got them aboard, came the report. Ellis didn't hesitate. Helm, get us out of here! Maximum thrust. The Dauntless turned sharply, engines roaring. The view outside was fire and light. The colony below cracked open like an egg, the explosion blooming outward. The shockwave slammed against the ship's shields. The sound was a low, thunderous roar that shook Lyra to her core. For a moment, she thought they wouldn't make it. Then the stars stretched into lines, and the ship jumped into faster-than-light space. Silence filled the bridge. Everyone was breathing hard. A few wiped tears from their faces. Others simply sat down, exhausted but alive. Ellis leaned against the captain's chair, her eyes closed, her voice soft. Good work, everyone. Lyra stood in the corner, unable to speak. She looked at these strange, fragile beings, their tired smiles, their trembling hands, their eyes red from tears and smoke. They were so small, so imperfect, and yet they had done the impossible. She remembered the faces of the miners they'd saved, the hands reaching for help, the fear in their eyes turning into hope. Humans were afraid, yes, but they didn't let fear rule them. They didn't run from it. They faced it head-on. Later, in her private quarters, Lyra sat at her console. Her fingers hovered above the report pad, but for the first time she didn't know what to write. Her old words, miserable, cowards, irrational, felt hollow now. She had seen fear, pain, and chaos, but also courage, sacrifice, and something far greater than logic. She finally began typing slowly. The humans are not fearless. They are afraid every moment, but they act anyway. Their courage is not the absence of fear. It is the triumph over it. She paused, reading the words again. For the first time in her life, Lyra wasn't sure if her people truly understood what bravery meant. The Dauntless floated in the quiet darkness of space, far from the explosion that had destroyed the Orphean colony. The stars outside looked peaceful, but inside the ship there was no peace. The hull groaned under stress, lights flickered, and tired faces filled every corridor. The rescue had saved hundreds of lives, but it had come at a terrible cost. The reactor was unstable, the oxygen reserves were dropping, and several decks had been damaged beyond repair. Lyra walked through the narrow halls, her silver eyes scanning the damage. She saw humans patching holes, carrying wounded survivors, and sharing what little food they had. No one was resting. Even the injured worked beside the others. Every time she thought they would collapse from exhaustion, someone cracked a joke, someone laughed, and they found new strength to keep going. It confused her and deep down humbled her. The air felt heavy. She passed the med bay, where the smell of antiseptic filled the room. Captain Ellis sat beside a wounded child rescued from the colony. The boy's arm was broken, his face pale, but Ellis spoke softly to him. her tone calm and warm. "You're safe now," she said, smiling despite the pain in her own eyes. "You're on the Dauntless. We'll get you home." The boy looked up weakly. Will the others be okay?" Ellis hesitated for a heartbeat before answering. "We saved as many as we could." Lyra stood at the door, watching. It was not a commander's duty to comfort the wounded in Solari culture. That was the work of healers or assistants. A leader was supposed to remain distant and cold. Yet Ellis stayed with the boy until he fell asleep. When she finally stood, Lyra spoke. "You should rest, Captain." Ellis gave a tired smile. "I will when the ship stops falling apart." Lyra followed her to the bridge. The lights were dim, and warning alarms blinked across the control panels. The crew worked silently, their movements slow but sure. Ellis leaned over the console. "Engineering report," she said. The voice over the comms was strained. "Reactor's holding for now, but the containment field is damaged. We can't make another jump until it's fixed." "How long?" 6 hours, maybe less if the core keeps heating." Lyra frowned. "Then we're stranded." Ellis turned to her. "We're not stranded. We just need to keep it together until the repairs are done." "Your optimism is illogical," Lyra said quietly. "The damage is extensive. The probability of survival—" "Don't tell me the odds, Lyra," Ellis interrupted gently. "Humans don't live by numbers. We live by choices." Lyra didn't reply. She wanted to understand how that made sense. To her, numbers and logic were everything. They guided decisions, prevented mistakes, and ensured survival. But humans seemed to find strength in defiance of reason. Hours passed. The crew worked nonstop. Lyra helped where she could, moving equipment, stabilizing damaged circuits, and translating alien tech to assist the engineers. The heat from the reactor grew worse. Sweat dripped down her neck inside her suit. The walls vibrated softly as if the ship itself was groaning in pain. Suddenly, a loud explosion shook the entire deck. The lights went out for a moment, replaced by red emergency flashes. Smoke filled the air. "Reactor breach!" someone shouted. "Containment field collapsing." Ellis grabbed the intercom. "All personnel evacuate lower decks immediately. Seal bulkheads behind you." Lyra's heart raced as she followed the captain toward the engineering section. The metal under their feet was hot, the air thick with the smell of burning circuits. "Captain, the engineers can handle it," Lyra said, struggling to keep up. "They'll need every hand they can get," Ellis replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. They reached the reactor chamber. Flames licked the walls, sparks showering from broken conduits. Engineers in radiation suits fought to keep the containment field stable. Lyra saw Ramos among them, his face streaked with soot, his hands moving quickly over the controls. "Ramos, report," Ellis shouted. "Containment's collapsing, Captain." "The stabilizers are fried. We can't hold it much longer." Ellis moved beside him, pulling off a panel. "What if we reroute the magnetic lines manually?" Ramos stared at her. "That could work, but someone would have to go inside the reactor bay to realign the conduits. The radiation will kill whoever goes in within minutes." Lyra froze. She expected Ellis to order a retreat, to save the ship and abandon the core. Instead, Ellis nodded. "Then I'll do it." Ramos's eyes widened. "Captain, no!" "That's an order," Ellis said firmly. Lyra stepped forward. "You can't, you'll die." Ellis turned to her, a faint smile on her face. "Somebody has to go. If that core explodes, everyone dies. If I go in, maybe they live." Lyra shook her head, her voice trembling. "Let me do it. I have higher radiation tolerance." Ellis looked at her with kind eyes. "You're an observer, Lyra. You're meant to tell our story, not end it here." Before Lyra could respond, the captain was already walking toward the heavy door that led to the reactor bay. She grabbed her radiation suit and sealed the helmet. Ramos tried to stop her, but she pushed his hands away gently. "Keep the field steady until I'm done." The door closed behind her with a hiss. Through the thick glass, Lyra watched as Ellis entered the glowing chamber. The light from the reactor bathed her in blue fire. The suit's sensors beeped frantically as radiation levels spiked. Ellis moved slowly, pulling levers and adjusting magnetic lines by hand. Sparks rained down around her. Her breathing echoed through the comm channel. "Status?" she asked. "Stabilizing," Ramos said, his voice shaking. "Almost there. Just one more line." Lyra's hands were pressed against the glass. She wanted to look away but couldn't. Her heart pounded painfully. The reading showed dangerous levels. "Captain, come back. You've done enough." "Not yet," Ellis replied softly. "Almost done." There was a flash of light. For a moment, Lyra thought Ellis had been consumed by the reactor. Then the alarm stopped. The hum of the reactor steadied. The readings turned green. The containment field was restored. Cheers broke out in engineering. The danger had passed. But Lyra's eyes stayed fixed on the figure inside the chamber. Ellis had collapsed. Her suit lights flickered weakly. "Reactor stabilized," Ramos said, his voice breaking. "But the captain..." Lyra didn't think. She ran for the door, overriding the safety lock. "Open it," Ramos shouted. "Lyra, no!" Radiation. But she was already inside. The heat was unbearable. Her vision blurred. She stumbled through the glowing chamber until she reached Ellis, who lay motionless near the core. Lyra knelt beside her, pulling the captain's arm over her shoulder and dragging her toward the exit. Every step felt heavier than the last. Her suit alarms screamed, but she ignored them. When they finally reached the door, Ramos and 2 others pulled them through. The door sealed shut behind them, isolating the chamber once more. The medics rushed forward, removing Ellis's helmet. Her face was pale, her eyes barely open. "Captain, can you hear me?" Lyra whispered. Ellis gave a faint smile. "Told you. We'd hold together." Her voice was weak, but her eyes were calm. Lyra gripped her hand tightly. "You're going to live." "Maybe," Ellis whispered. "Doesn't matter. The ship's safe. That's what counts." Lyra felt her throat tighten. She had never seen anyone so fragile, so broken, yet so proud. The medics lifted Ellis onto a stretcher and carried her away. Lyra followed, silent. Hours later, the ship was quiet again. The repairs were complete, the reactor stable. The surviving colonists rested in the cargo bay, whispering prayers of thanks. Lyra sat beside Ellis in the med bay. The captain was unconscious, her body weak but alive. Machines hummed softly around her bed. Lyra watched her breathe. She thought of what Ellis had said, that humans lived by choices, not numbers. It was true. No logic, no calculation, no rule could explain what she had seen today. The Solari would have called it madness, but Lyra now saw it for what it was. Courage born not of strength but of love. Ramos entered quietly, his arm in a sling. "She'll make it," he said, relief softening his voice. "Doctors say she's tough as steel." Lyra smiled faintly. "She's something else." Ramos sat beside her. "She'd have liked hearing that from you." Lyra looked at Ellis again. "She risked her life for all of you. For people she didn't even know. My kind would never understand that." Ramos leaned back. "Maybe not. But that's what makes humans what we are. We care even when it hurts. Maybe especially then." Lyra didn't answer. She simply nodded, lost in thought. Later, she returned to her quarters and opened her log. Her fingers hovered above the console before she began to write. "Humans are not logical. They act against reason, defy fear, and choose compassion over safety. I once thought that made them weak. Now I see it as their strength. Courage, it seems, is not about surviving. It is about choosing to face the darkness for someone else." She paused, staring at the words. For the first time, she felt proud to write them. The humans were not what she had believed. They were fragile, flawed, and full of fear. But in their fear, they found greatness. And as she looked out the window at the endless stars, Lyra realized something she had never expected. She wanted to be more like them. Days passed aboard the Dauntless. The engines hummed softly again, and the flickering lights were finally stable. Repairs continued, but the worst was over. The survivors from the Orphean colony were recovering, and for the first time since the disaster, there was laughter echoing through the ship's halls. It was quieter than before, but it was still there. Stubborn, human laughter that refused to die, even in the shadow of tragedy. Lyra sat in the med bay beside Captain Ellis, who was still weak but conscious now. The captain's skin was pale, her hair thin from radiation exposure, yet her eyes held that same warmth, the same unshakable will. A monitor beeped softly beside her bed. "You should rest," Lyra said softly. "I'll rest when they stop worrying," Ellis replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. "How's the ship?" "Stable," Lyra said. "The engineers say the reactor is holding perfectly. They even fixed the communication relay." Ellis nodded slowly. "Good. We'll send the colonists home soon." Lyra hesitated before speaking again. "You could have died." "I almost did," Ellis said calmly. "But I didn't. That's the thing about humans, Lyra. We don't always win." But we keep trying until we can't anymore. Lyra looked down, thinking about the moment in the reactor room, the heat, the light, and the choice Ellis made without hesitation. Among my people, she said quietly, you would be called irrational, illogical, even foolish. Ellis chuckled weakly. That's fair. But maybe logic isn't everything. Lyra met her gaze. It isn't, she admitted after a pause. Not anymore. The captain's smile widened just a little. Then she closed her eyes, drifting back into sleep. Lyra stayed by her side for a long time, listening to the steady rhythm of the machines. Outside the medbay, the humans were celebrating quietly in the cafeteria. Ramos was there, sitting with a few of the rescued miners. They had salvaged a few bottles of preserved juice from the storage room, and they were toasting to survival. The air was filled with stories, some funny, some sad, all filled with gratitude. Lyra stood near the doorway watching. When Ramos saw her, he waved. Hey, observer, come join the heroes' table. She stepped closer. I am no hero, Ramos grinned. You dragged the captain out of a melting reactor. That's hero enough for anyone. Lyra sat beside them, feeling awkward. The humans laughed, told jokes, and shared memories of Earth, beaches, cities, mountains, things Lyra had only seen in data files. One of the miners, a young woman named Juno, looked at her curiously. Is it true your people don't feel fear? Lyra hesitated. We removed it from ourselves long ago. We learned to silence emotion to think more clearly. Juno shook her head. Sounds lonely, Lyra blinked.
Lonely?
Yeah, Juno said. Fear's not just bad, you know. It reminds us what matters. It tells us we're alive, Lyra fell silent. Those words echoed in her mind, sounding strangely familiar. Almost exactly what Ellis had said days ago. After the small celebration ended, Lyra returned to her quarters. The window showed the endless spread of stars. She remembered how those stars used to feel cold to her, distant and meaningless. Now they looked different. They were beautiful, fragile lights in a dark universe, and she thought maybe that was what humans were too, small lights that refused to go out. She opened her mission log and began to record her final report to the Solari Council. Her fingers moved slowly over the console as she spoke. This is Observer Lyra of the Solari Empire, assigned to the Terran vessel Dauntless. Mission concluded. My findings differ from the Council's expectations. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Humans are not miserable. They are not cowards. They are fragile, yes, and fearful and emotional. But those things are not weaknesses. They are strengths. They feel deeply, and because they feel, they fight harder. They are afraid of pain and loss, but they face both with courage. Their bravery is not the absence of fear, but the victory over it. She looked down for a moment before continuing. They laugh in the face of danger. They comfort the dying. They risk their lives for strangers. They call this madness, but I call it hope. I came here believing they were lesser beings. I leave knowing they are something more, a force that even fear cannot break. She stopped recording and sat in silence. For a long time, she just stared at the stars, letting the hum of the ship fill the quiet room. Later that evening, Ellis woke again. She requested to see Lyra in private. When Lyra entered the medbay, the captain's eyes were open, and a faint smile crossed her lips. You look thoughtful, she said softly. I was finishing my report, Lyra replied. It is not what the Council expects, Ellis chuckled. Let me guess, you told them we're not total disasters? Lyra smiled, the expression still strange on her face. I told them you are extraordinary. And dangerous. Dangerous? Ellis asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, Lyra said. Because you do not stop. You keep moving forward no matter what happens. You fear death, yet you face it willingly. You fear loss, yet you give everything. You fear failure, yet you try again. That makes you unstoppable. Ellis laughed softly, then coughed a little from the effort. Sounds about right. Lyra tilted her head. You risked your life for people you did not know. I still do not understand why. Ellis looked at her quietly. Because someone has to. Every time we reach out, we make the universe a little less cold. If we don't do that, then what's the point of being alive? Lyra said nothing. The simplicity of that answer struck her harder than any speech could have. Days turned into weeks. The Dauntless finally returned to Terran space, where rescue ships met them. The survivors were escorted away with tears and gratitude. The crew was welcomed as heroes, though none of them seemed to feel like it. They had done what they thought was right, nothing more, nothing less. Before Lyra left the ship to return to the Solari fleet, she stood once more at the observation deck. The stars shone brightly and the planet Earth hung below them, blue, alive, and beautiful. Ramos joined her there, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "You'll miss this," he said. "I do not miss things," Lyra said automatically, then paused. "But perhaps I will," Ramos laughed. "That's close enough for me." He took a sip and looked out at the stars. "So what will you tell your people about us?" Lyra thought for a moment. "The truth. That you are afraid. That you are fragile. That you cry and laugh and fight and never give up. And that one day when the stars go dark, it will be humans who light them again." Ramos blinked, surprised. "That's poetic. Maybe your kind is rubbing off on me," Lyra said softly. When it was time for her to leave, Ellis met her at the airlock, walking slowly but on her own feet. "Take care of yourself, Lyra," she said. "You too, Captain." Lyra hesitated, then added, "You changed how I see your kind. How I see courage." Ellis smiled. The tired but kind smile Lyra would never forget. "And you changed how I see aliens. Maybe we're not so different after all." Lyra bowed slightly, a Solari gesture of respect. "Perhaps not." As the Solari shuttle carried her away from the Dauntless, Lyra looked back one last time. The human ship floated quietly in the dark, its engines glowing faintly. It looked small compared to the vastness around it, fragile, almost insignificant. Yet it had done what many great fleets could not. It had saved lives, defied fear, and stood unbroken in the face of death. When Lyra returned to her homeworld weeks later, the council called her report controversial. Some dismissed her words as emotional weakness, but others listened, truly listened. For the first time, the Solari Empire began to question if maybe emotion was not their enemy. Lyra didn't care whether her report pleased them or not. She had seen something they hadn't, a truth written in fire, sacrifice, and laughter. Humans were imperfect, yes, but they were also magnificent. And sometimes, late at night, Lyra would sit by her window and think of the Dauntless and its crew. She would remember Ellis's calm voice, Ramos's laughter, the songs the crew sang while fixing broken machines, and the way fear had turned into courage before her eyes. Once, she had believed that humans were miserable cowards. Now she knew they were something far greater. Creatures who looked at the darkness, trembled, and stepped forward anyway. And that, Lyra thought, was what made them truly human.